Thank you so much for being back at your alma mater,
My
McGill,
pleasure.
in, January, cold January, back from Mexico. We were just talking about the weather. It's pretty terrible.
It is terrible.
Gabe, you were part of the 5-member MBA McGill HULT 2013 winning team.
Yep.
Congratulations
Thank
again,
you.
and I appreciate you being here. For our audience, would you mind just giving us a real quick overview of what the HULT Prize is so that we can all join you on this journey?
Sure. So the HULT Prize is the world's largest competition for social good or social business. So they have it's run by the HULT MBA programs, and there are 5 locations around the world where they have this competition. So 10,000 teams apply initially. That gets narrowed down to about 250 that go on site and compete, and then out of that, 5 teams move on to the finals in New York. And the finals are hosted in collaboration with the Clinton Global Initiative. So you have a pretty impressive group of people in the room, and then you get the 5 or 6 teams up on stage. They give their pitch, and they get judged, and then Bill Clinton comes out and he announces the winner.
Must have been quite an odyssey.
It was exciting, yeah. And I've actually been there twice now. So I was there the year I won, and then the year I won, Bill Clinton had chosen the topic was food security, and the year after, Bill Clinton chose non-communicable diseases. So that was the focus, and so I was there to watch the non-communicable diseases people compete. And there's another team from Canada there in 2014, York University represented, which was cool.
Great.
But in 2015, I'm hoping McGill gets back up.
Yeah, me too. Great. So with the topic was food security. Give us just a little historical rundown on how your group came together and why this topic appealed to you in that very early stage work that you did.
Sure. So we were a group of, like you said, 5 McGill MBA students. We're all first year in 2012, beginning of 2012. And Mohammed, one of our teammates, heard about it. He contacted me. Together we put the team together. And then we started thinking about food security in urban slums and how to address that. And we came up with a lot of really good ideas, but we knew we were going to be facing down the top schools around the world, and good wasn't going to cut it. So then we had to get a little crazy with our ideas to know that we were going to be competitive and come up with something that was going to be great.
Okay, so we're going to get into all of those pivots
Sure.
and wild ride that you were on in a few minutes. I want to take it back a little bit and just get a little glimpse into who you are as a person. So, your bio will be available to the viewers of our MOOC, but perhaps maybe taking it, beyond the bio. What about this space sort of attracts you, inspires you, compels you? Why are you interested in social entrepreneurship?
I had a solid background in not-for-profits and organized labor, actually, and I did that for about 10 years, primarily in the disabled space. And I liked it, but I was always frontline, and I felt like I couldn't affect any change. Then I went and I worked for corporate America for about 4 or 5 years, and it was cool doing things, but they just didn't feel as meaningful to me as I wanted. I wanted to find some sort of synthesis between the two. And I thought I'd go back, get my MBA, work for corporate America for a few more years to pad my resume, and then go find an NGO to work at a high level where I could do policy work and really do some directional stuff. And then the whole prize came along, and it was better than anything I'd ever hoped to do. The social entrepreneurship is just so cool and offers so many opportunities. I just had to jump at the opportunity.
Oh, great. So as a person, is there any guiding principle or philosophy, or it could be even reduced down to a quote that kind of inspires you and sheds a little extra light on who you are?
I don't have a good answer for that question, but you can answer that later. Maybe something will occur to me.
Okay, great. Okay, so I want to ask a question just generally about the space of social entrepreneurship now that you've been a practitioner for a good solid couple of years. What do you see as the space's strengths right now? What are some of the weaknesses or limitations you're seeing, and what are some of the big opportunities in the space?
Sure. In a way, you'd expect it to be a mature space because you can think back to Mohammed Yunus, and the Grameen Bank is really the place where social entrepreneurship got started. It was a long time ago, but it really is not, certainly not mature in North America and Europe. I don't think that there's enough structure from a legislative perspective, and I know it's weird to get into legislation, but when you think about how you raise money if you're doing something. You can raise money by start a for-profit business, raise money by offering people a really good return on their investment, and people, if you have a good plan, throw you money and off you go. Or if you're doing an NGO, then you go to people and you can get grants, you can get funds, and people will give you money knowing they get a good tax return on that, so they can work that in as well. And there really isn't a model for a social enterprise, because necessarily a social enterprise wants to reinvest its money to grow. And so it's going to limit, in many ways, what sort of returns they can give investors. At the same time, a social enterprise is necessarily a for-profit business, which means that there are a lot of grants, there are a lot of funds, there are a lot of associations that you simply can't go to and ask for money. So you're stuck in this weird middle zone where everybody loves what you're doing, but nobody wants to give you money. So that's a huge challenge. But for opportunities, the awareness of social entrepreneurship is spiking. You get so many people engaging in it. There are a lot of competitions around the world. I think the Hope Prize and the Clinton Global Initiative working together have done more to raise the profile of social enterprise than anything else. But you've got the Social Economy Initiative here. You've got some other organizations at schools that are kicking off. There are a couple global competitions out there. And so I think that as the awareness increases, you'll start seeing more investors find ways to work social entrepreneurship into their portfolios.
Henry poses a meta question around, the three big sectors: the public, the private, and what he calls the plural sector. It feels that the plural sector is not organized sufficiently to actually really be as powerful in the face of these strong other sectors. And he wants more collaboration and more interconnectedness and synthesis. Do you have any insight to offer in terms of how disparate organizations in the social sector, plural sector, can collaborate to be more effective?
I think it's going to take time. I agree with you and Mintzberg on that. I mean, we definitely need more organization, more collaboration, but you see it's simply not large at the moment, right? There aren't large networks of people, there aren't large groupings, there's not a lot of financial resources available, and for the organizations that do have resources, really they want to invest those back into their projects. And so some sort of industry association would be nice, and you can look around, you see lots of industry associations out there in the for-profit sector, and the for-profit sector knows that they can invest in that and they get a return. Convincing social entrepreneurship to invest in that is a challenge. The other problem is that I'm in food security. You could see somebody else who's in education and social entrepreneurship, and we're both social entrepreneurs, but is there that much alliance between us, synergies to gain by getting together? Probably, but somebody has to go and convince them, and I don't know who's gonna do that.
Right. Okay. So still lots of work to be done.
A lot of work.
Got it. Okay. So our MOOC has 5 big topics that we cover, and I'd like to ask some questions about each. So in the first instance, we talked about designing, that you have a vision for where you'd like to make change in the world on whatever topic that your social initiative is working on. And part of this design process is the constant need for learning and pivoting and making changes. So I am prepared to sit back and hear your story of Aspire's learning and designing, and even since the Hult Prize, how Aspire continues to learn and design its way forward. So what would you like to share with us?
There's a lot to share,
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of pivoting. You sometimes feel like you're doing more pivoting than anything else. I mean, like I said at the beginning, when we first started working on the Hult Prize, we knew we wanted to address food insecurity in urban slums. We had no idea how to do that, so we were looking at food carts and educational programs and redirecting waste side streams and a variety of things. We were building models and we were really iterating, not innovating. And I think that if you want to look for opportunities for real success in social entrepreneurship, there are opportunities in both. So I'm not going to tell people that they need to push out and innovate, because there are so many places where there are cracks and gaps and opportunities that you can grab that nobody's taken advantage of and slip in there and really add value. What we were looking at, though, we really felt that we needed to innovate to grab the judges' attention, because it's a competition. And so we ended up going with insects as a food source, based on the fact that a third of the population of the world eats insects. They're usually close to being superfoods, and almost everywhere you look, insects are priced more than beef or chicken. Anywhere, every market I've been to in the entire world, and I've been to a lot of insect markets, and I'm a vegetarian, so going to insect markets kind of freaks me out. I eat them, but I'm still coming to terms with it. They're always more expensive. So we figured if we could drive that price down, we had a great model. So that's where we started, and I think we initially decided that crickets were the way to go, because there was a lot of research on crickets, there was a lot of information there, we could do that effectively. And there are people who have been growing crickets for pet food for a long time, so we could take those learnings and apply them. And so that was probably our first core idea. And we thought we'd work in slums, and we had all these ideas. And then we had to start pivoting, because we went to slums and we found out that, okay, people don't want a big thing of crickets in their bedroom, which is fair. But also, I learned something about people who, like the urban poor. I mean, slums are primarily migrant dwellings. You don't get people living in slums for 3 or 4 generations. They come in from the country for a large part, and they've grown up in farming communities, and they come in and they think of farming as sort of the country bumpkin kind of thing to do, and they want to think of themselves as sophisticated urban dwellers, and generating their own food is not attractive. So I've seen actually a number of projects that have looked at growing food in slums fail, in large part because of that mentality. Not to say that it can't work, I just haven't seen it work yet. So we had to pivot away from that and go out into rural communities and have them grow food. We found other strange things. Again, I'm a vegetarian, so people's dietary habits around meat I've always found a little weird. But I was in one community where in Mexico, where they love grasshoppers. And grasshoppers are delicious, they're really a premium food, they're quite expensive. And I saw a cricket hopping by, and I pointed out to one of the people I was at, and they responded with absolute disgust. And they're like, why would we eat one of those? They're disgusting. A grasshopper, which to me at the time, almost indistinguishable. The grasshoppers are delicacies, and the crickets are disgusting. And so we had to pivot. We couldn't just stick with crickets. And there have been a series of pivots since then. We thought we were going to produce units that we could sell to people to grow their own insects, and then it looked like the manufacturing cost would be too high, the returns weren't good, so we pivoted away from that. And then just recently we found that there might actually be a market for those, so we're pivoting back. We thought there were some wayside streams we could monetize. We found out we couldn't, we pivoted away. Now maybe we can monetize them again, so we're pivoting back. So I think what we ended up doing is having a long list of things we wanted to do, and we had to narrow down and focus on 1 or 2 that we knew for sure we could do, and then push everything else to the side. And then as we develop those, we've got this growing list of other things that are interesting, and then we can pull them in or push them out as opportunities present themselves. But it's good to have that sort of pool sitting on the side of the parking lot, full of opportunities that you can drag in. And they're also good because if one of the core things that you've decided to focus on all of a sudden, for whatever reason, goes sideways, you've got a whole bunch of ideas that fit with your mission, and you can pull in. And it may be a big pivot internally, but you don't have to tell the rest of the world how seriously you're changing your plan.
Mm-hmm. So what comes to mind as I'm hearing what you just described is you read a lot about design thinking and human-centered design, and it sounds like even your first explanation of migrant workers don't want to farm themselves because that reminds them of the homeland and living off the land. You wouldn't have known that if you hadn't visited. So I just want you to maybe comment for anybody who's starting a social initiative to understand the value of this ethnographic kind of design thinking approach to social entrepreneurship.
Yeah, the ideas that we had before we got on the ground we essentially had to throw almost everything away except for a rough skeleton that we could build on, because when we started talking to people, we realized all our ideas were wrong. And I mean, we did a lot of reading. We thought we had the right resources. We thought that reading would get us it, and the situation on the ground is always different, and that hasn't stopped. I constantly have to be engaging the communities, going out into the country, talking to people. I mean, I live in Mexico, and I'm constantly learning new things that force us to change our plans. So yeah, that constant iteration with people who are involved is essential. You see it often in tech companies, the idea that you should iterate early and often. So you just come out with whatever product you can, get it out there, get some feedback on it, and start iterating. It's a little harder to do that with a non-tech product, but everything that you can do early, you should do early.
And what I'm going to be talking later about sort of your team and its effectiveness in collaboration, but it sounds to me like you were a real team of learning and willingness to adapt to new information and absorb and react. And did you all share that same sort of spirit, or was there a guiding force propelling that willingness?
I think we all came to the enterprise, first the Hall Prize and then Aspire once we won, with different priorities, different motivations, different reasons for being there. And we all have fairly different personalities. So we have some people on the team who really are dreamers, and they think that everything's going to work. And then you have people like me who are cynics, and I think nothing's going to work. And you need a balance, because if you just had me, you wouldn't do anything. And if you just had the other people, you'd do 1,000 things and none of them would work. Mm-hmm. And so I think finding that balance really helps. But to go back to your question about dreaming, I think we all see the potential impact of what we're doing, and I think that more than anything is what's pushing us forward and driving us to make this successful. We talk a couple times a week, all of us, and we're always looking well into the future and trying to see, what impact we'll have, who we're going to be impacting. Are we doing enough? Is there something more we can be doing? Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's good to be with a group of people like that. It really helps motivate you and keep you pushing.
So you feel that values alignment in terms of mission is really kind of core to the work in social entrepreneurship. You can't fake it.
You can't fake it. I don't think you need 100% value alignment, because I don't think we do. We, like I said, all have different priorities, but I think we're all bought into the mission to a sufficient degree that it works out. And I think the differences add value. I think in Venn diagrams it's probably not good, but I'd say that there's a core of overlap where we're all overlapping, and then we've all got other things going on as well. But I think that like I said, the combination of the diversity and some significant degree of alignment is what you need.
And on a hard day, do you remind yourself about the ultimate social impact? Like, do you come back to that? Is it helpful?
On a hard day, I'll call someone on the team if I've had a really hard day, and just sort of talk through it, and they can usually, remind me that it's not so bad. Although I live in Mexico, there aren't that many hard days. It's pretty nice there.
Great. Okay, so we've already touched on your group dynamics. We call it mobilization. Mm-hmm. So mobilizing people internally towards a common vision, and then mobilizing external stakeholders to come on board. So I'd really love for you to take a few minutes to describe your group dynamics, what you think really worked for you in retrospect, what you'd have done differently, what you learned through the process to actually improve the dynamics and effectiveness. So take us there.
Yeah, so we came together as a team of 5. 5 is a great number, by the way. I'm a big proponent. It's a weird place to start, but I'm a big proponent of uneven numbers for teams, mm-hmm. because when you have to make a decision, you vote and the decision's made. There's not going to be a lot of ties. And it seems weird, but that actually allows us to be really efficient and dynamic and agile at the beginning, because and we'd all come to the table, we'd throw our ideas down, we'd vote. The vote would come out in one direction or another, and we'd move on. I think that if we had been 4 people, there would have been a number of places where it would have totally stalled out. But to be able to make that work properly, you have to be willing to let go when you get voted down. And everybody on the team has been voted down a good number of times on their ideas. And when that happens, just take your idea, put it on the shelf, and just accept it. And I think that is an important dynamic to have in a team. Now, Mohammed is our CEO, and he was the first person to hear about the whole prize. And then he contacted me, and we brought together Shobita, Zev, and Jesse. And you definitely need, when you're forming a team, to look at getting a broad array of skills in there. And I think we did an effective job. We have people with finance background, with a variety of science backgrounds, legal backgrounds, and if we brought all that together, now there are still skills we're missing. We could definitely have used a mechanical engineer, maybe someone with a marketing executive background, but part of that is balancing the skills you have, using what you can inside, figuring out what you need to go out of house for, and then finding the people who can supply those to you. But once you bring that team together, keeping the team motivated and focused and on task and on topic is probably a challenge.
Right, so did you guys develop some tools to make meetings work,
Sure.
to have some joy and laughter once in a while?
Yeah, we definitely developed tools, and then we dumped a bunch of them.
Mm-hmm.
So at one point we tried a reporting matrix because we wanted to make sure that we were all holding each other accountable for the deliverables. We've all been on group projects where someone coasts and everybody else doesn't want to bad marks. You just carry the coaster and you do the work, and that wasn't going to fly here. So we developed a matrix reporting structure where everybody reported to 2 team members, and then the 2 team members that they didn't report to reported to them. So it was a 5-way matrix, and that was interesting but complicated.
Mm-hmm.
And we did that for a while, and then decided that it was better just to report to the whole team, just come in, lay it down, and have people just assess as a group your work. So it's nice that the hierarchy is fairly flat. There's no one really in charge of anybody else, but you're accountable to everybody else on the team. And it's nice because you see what everybody else is doing, and you see everybody adding value, and you want to add more value than anybody else.
Mm-hmm.
And so you end up reasonably competitive,
Mm-hmm.
but definitely in a positive way. There's very little adversarial tendencies in our group, which is good.
So is it really a matter of stroke of luck, or I mean, you could say you have complementary skills, and then you all were intrinsically motivated to bring value to the team? I mean, so you just got lucky in terms of personality combination, or did you work at that too in terms of group dynamics?
Yeah, we worked at that. There were certainly times where there were, like early on, there were periods of conflict. I think it would come and go. You know, we'd have a little bit of conflict. Then we'd focus on the project. Then it'd be a little bit more conflict, and it would go back and forth. But I think that there were times when things got pretty tense. I mean, you're 5 people working on a project, sometimes in really close quarters. We spent like 6 weeks living in Boston, where we lived in the same place, and we were together for hours and hours every single day. And yeah, we had some tense periods, but I think that, not unlike having a family, you certainly learn how to piss everybody off. If you want to piss people off, you can do that. But it's not constructive, and you figure out the idiosyncrasies other people have that set you off, and you work out a way to balance them. And I think that if you're motivated and if you can avoid negative attribution, then you're good. And I think that's a big thing. Avoiding, like if somebody does something that you don't like, at least being able to find it within yourself to say they're doing that for good reasons, not for malicious, nasty reasons,
Mm-hmm.
then you can get through those conflicts.
Lots of goodwill then.
Mm-hmm.
Now
Yeah.
you alluded to the 6 weeks that you spent in Boston in, I guess, an incubator or an accelerator.
That's right.
Would you comment just on the concept of that generally? Is it a good thing? How could, the infrastructure of social entrepreneurship support social entrepreneurs better? Is that something that we could be doing differently?
Yeah, incubators have proven track record of success in the tech industry. And it depends on the group of people that are coming in. I think everybody's going to get something different from an incubator. We had, like I said, a diverse set of skills. We had a lot of experience, but there's still a lot of things that we learned from the incubator. They'd bring in consultants, other people who'd started businesses, people who had worked in the social entrepreneurship field, and legal people as well. And so it just gives you some contact with people you wouldn't otherwise have. But it's also nice to have that enforced work time with each other, and the combination of that being stuck there. And it's not, I mean, the nice thing about an incubator is it's not just you, right? It's not just you and your team, it's a bunch of other teams as well. And yeah, I'd say I'm a proponent of the incubator model. I know it doesn't work for everybody, but I've seen a number of people. I talk with a lot of entrepreneurs now, and I do some mentoring work. And there was a group that I was working with recently who didn't end up in an incubator, but they found an entrepreneur house. And they went there, and there was some 15 people living in the house, and it was a big house, big meeting rooms, and they all rented it. And they found it an inspiring place to work. And every now and then they'd have a dragging day because there are only 2 of them. And so you don't have that same team dynamic pushing you. But then if they had a bad day, they walk downstairs and they have a room with like 7 people drawing on whiteboards and stuff and really excited. And that energy is infectious.
That's great. So again, mobilizing. You talked a little bit about your team. I wonder if you could comment on some surprises that came along the way in terms of people that decided they wanted to step up and help you out. And also if you could comment on some strategic ways that you actually did mobilize support towards you.
I think we were really impressed by the McGill community. After we won in Boston, so we were in Boston for the regional final. It's also where after the accelerator was. But we were in Boston for the regional final, and when we won that, we were one of 6 teams that were going to compete on stage in New York. So we came back to Montreal, the only team in Canada that had made the final round, and we just got a huge amount of support from the university itself, from the alumni network, a huge amount of support from Chancellor Arnold Steinberg, and they really helped us believe that this was possible. By ourselves, after we had won, we were excited, but we were intimidated by the scale of work that was required. And we had heard that previous winning teams had put significant resources forward, but McGill came, they stepped up and really enabled us to put our best foot forward and go to the final in New York well prepared. So, I mean, the problem is that it's hard to generate really good advice out of this for the average social entrepreneur, because we had a huge amount of PR and got a huge amount of support from winning the regional finals. I think a piece of advice you can take out of that is go compete, because if you compete, win or lose, the relationships you build are great. I was just in Athens about a month ago for a startup competition there. It wasn't social entrepreneurship, but it was entrepreneurship, and a lot of the entrepreneurs certainly had a social bent to their businesses. There were 5 competitions, 1 team won off of each competition. There were probably 10 teams per competition. So you've got 50 teams, 5 winners, but so many of the other teams built these really strong relationships while they were there. So win or lose, going to competitions, I think adds a huge amount of value for social entrepreneurs. And not just the PR and not just the relationships you build, but there's also an opportunity to stress test and innovate while you're there. You look at what other people are doing, you kick your ideas off of them, you can get a lot of feedback, especially considering the fact that you're probably not competitors with most of the people there. And so there's only value to be added in talking with other people. And I think that type of networking, and that's an easy way to pull people into your network. If you're trying to build those relationships outside of your core group, then yeah, going to those types of competitions really can help with that.
So I want to just add another follow-up question to this idea of a community of social entrepreneurs that's growing, sharing ideas across the world. Do you sense that there's a bit of like strong momentum, even to the point of tipping point, even to the point of like new paradigm showing up? Like, what's your sense? What's the scope and scale and timeline of big change?
I think a tipping point here is something we're only going to recognize in the rearview mirror. We're only going to know it a couple of years after it happens. So maybe we're past it, and that would be very exciting. But it seems to be going in fits and starts. I went to Mohammed Yunus. I actually saw you there in Mexico. Mohammed Yunus had a conference there, and there were a lot of people there talking about the innovation. I was at another conference in Mexico, lots of entrepreneurs. Social entrepreneurship gets mentioned to some degree in these places, but then it seems there doesn't seem to be, if we go back to what we were discussing earlier, there doesn't seem to be that support network to help it flourish. So you get a lot of people who are interested in the idea, they try to work on it, there are too many barriers, and it falls away. And so where the tipping point is, it's hard to say. I think we're probably a year or two out before it really develops as much momentum as it could. But I think we're going to see first localized tipping points. And I think that there's a possibility places like Montreal, we may already be there. I think the Social Economy Initiative is doing a good job to push that. And there are other places that have a strong startup culture. In Silicon Valley, in Athens, honestly, in Monterrey, Mexico. There are places where they have a strong entrepreneurship culture. And then I think once you have that infrastructure, building social entrepreneurship there is not as difficult. And
do you feel that the space is bringing in some really talented people? Like, is it attracting the right people?
It's starting to. I'm a little older, but when you see the millennials and people coming in who are like 21, 22, 23, and they could do the entrepreneurship thing and maybe make 7 figures or 8 figures or more, but they have the opportunity to really affect meaningful change. I think more of them are electing that than older people.
Mm-hmm. So the next topic would be on scaling. The whole idea of a good idea scaling either broadly or even the initiative itself scaling in a very big way. You had success, obviously, with a serious chunk of money, having won the competition. How did you scale? What were some of the lessons there? And then I'll ask some follow-up questions from that too.
Sure. So scaling is an interesting thing, especially when you're in a biological situation. So scaling, when you talk about insects, is not the same as scaling in tech or in any sort of manufacturing field, because our raw material breeds at a specific rate, and there's very little you can do with that. If I gave you a corn kernel and told you to give me a field of corn, you could. It might take you 5 or 6 years, but you could do it. And so there are those additional biological limitations on scaling that we're facing, and we're working through those, but they certainly have slowed us down on the production side of things.
That's when we talked about insect porn, right?
Insect porn. That might be the trick. That's some Barry Manilow. So I mean that's slowing me down, but we're doing a lot of other things where we don't need to depend on that production to be able to move. So we're building a lot of relationships to help us scale. I think I read an article recently for entrepreneurs that said do things in a non-scalable way at the beginning, right? Don't try to build your business model initially as a business model that will scale perfectly. Excuse me. So don't build your business as a business model that will scale perfectly, because you're not at that stage right now. And so there might be things that you want to do now that you wouldn't be able to do if you were $1 million company. And maybe that is really a high-touch customer service, right? Maybe you want to build a personal relationship with every single one of your customers. You can't do that once you have more than 50 customers, probably, certainly more than a few hundred. But at the beginning, doing that, you can build really strong word of mouth and really strong relationships. And I think to successfully scale, all the tech questions and the biological insect porn questions aside, I think those relationships are really what's going to drive your ability to scale, how much people uptake what it is that you're offering.
So a really good idea will scale if you bring the right people to the table. It's a matter of nurturing those relationships.
I mean, there are always other factors to consider, but I'd say yes, a really good idea, and I'd say probably an okay idea will scale. If you can build relationships really well, then your idea probably doesn't even have to be as good. Great ideas are better, clearly, but I think you see a lot of brilliant ideas fail, and some mediocre ones be quite successful, and I think relationship helps drive that a lot.
So what are some personal bits of advice on relationship building? It sounds like that's important to you.
Relationship building is important, and it's something that I struggle with, to be honest. I'm not particularly good. I'm not as good as I'd like to be at relationship building. But they're the regular things that you do: build your network, get on LinkedIn, build your profile, build your connections, be active on social media, and beyond that, find those high value adds in your network and maintain those relationships. There have been, through the whole process, I've met some impressive people. I've not maintained all those relationships as well as I should, and that's value lost for me. But you can use, there's all sorts of tracking tools out there. It wouldn't be a bad idea. There's free CRM material out there, free online CRM websites, and you can get one of those, and you can use those to track your relationships. Now, they're not exactly customers, but they're people who add value in your network, and so if you put them into that, then you can track your interactions with them and make sure you develop them. And I don't want that to sound too calculating, because we're talking about people, and these relationships are, they're good, valuable people to have around. And I'd say some of my relationships are friends, and they're probably still in my CRM material, my CRM software, because I'm busy and I forget people and I forget to do things. And if it's there, then I can get a flag that pops up that says I haven't talked to somebody in a few months, and I should probably reach out to them and say hi. And so I do that. I think my best friend is in there, because he lives, well, I live in Mexico, but he's lived far away for a while. And honestly, if I didn't get flags popping up, we just wouldn't talk. So I find that is a really helpful tool.
And you bring up a tangent type question, which is balance, right? You're working hard on this mission thing, working really hard as far as I know. How do you manage the personal relationships and eating and sleeping and exercising?
So that's right. So relationships are a struggle, and when you talk to people about work-life balance, in anybody who's going into any sort of management level job in Canada, the US, Europe, it's going to eat up a good chunk of your life, and balance is going to be hard there. If you go into entrepreneurship, it's going to eat up your entire life, and it's really going to be very hard to find balance. So, for example, in my case, I got married 2 weeks before I moved to Mexico, and I left my wife behind in Canada. And that was about 6 months ago. We've been married for 6 months, and I've seen her for maybe 6 weeks in those 6 months, if that. So I'm not particularly good at balance. But we work it out. So it's good to have people around you who understand the commitment. But if you're going to start a business, be it a social entrepreneurship venture or any type of entrepreneurship venture, you're going to be low on balance for a couple of years, and I think that's just something you have to expect.
So bringing both those conversations together, relationships you were talking about, who are the people in your network that are value add, but then you get a lot of demands on your time too from people who are trying to learn from you, right? After this conversation, you're going to be meeting with several teams at McGill that are going for this year's Health Prize, right? And that's a great gift that you're giving your time, but you must be inundated with that. How do you sort of find that balance between the karmic, feeding the karmic meter, knowing that it's going to come back to you, or what's your experience with that been?
Yeah, I would say we've had just an incredible amount of support going through, and I really do believe in that pay it forward sentiment. And so, like I said, I think there are 2 or 3 groups that I'm mentoring fairly regularly right now, and lots of others that reach out to us. I probably take 2 or 3 calls a week with people, like new ads who just reach out to me, and I'll chat with them. I think that building that in is really good, because I mean, it's nice, honestly, just for you, because you get to think about other people's problems. You get to get a little bit outside of your head and stop being just obsessively focused on the things that you're working on. I've had a number of people that I've talked to either generate ideas themselves, or give me a suggestion, or just say something that triggered something for me, and I was able to follow through on that and add value to my side. But even if you're not going to get that out of it, or build relationships that will come back in a couple of years, and they will have made connections that are valuable for you, and they'll introduce them to you. Even if you don't get that, it's still just nice to talk to people. And I think, to go back to what you said earlier, when you have hard days and you're looking to maintain that motivation, talking to new people who are getting into the space and who are really excited and passionate themselves, it really helps keep you engaged. And so you do that for half an hour, and then afterwards they're so pumped, you're so pumped, you're just in a great mood, and off you go, and you do more stuff. It's one of the high points of doing this, I think.
Sure, that makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to talk about resourcing now.
Sure.
So there's lots of money in the world. It stays in private sector. You were talking about this social entrepreneurship space that is sort of in between both worlds and not perfectly funded. How did you approach resourcing, and what advice have you got for social initiatives that are looking at the resourcing question?
Resourcing is challenging. So again, we were lucky when it came to resourcing. We won the whole prize. We had $1 million come in the door, and that was nice, and that really kicked us off. But we're operating in 3 countries, and that gives you a pretty significant burn rate, and we're going to run out of money eventually. And so resourcing is becoming a critical issue for us. For other social entrepreneurs, there are a variety of ways to look at it. When we were at our incubator in Boston, we met a social entrepreneur who spent 3 years doing competitions, just doing competitions. They barely moved their project forward. They were focused on just going to competitions and pitching, and they raised a fair amount of capital by doing that. They weren't always successful, but they often made some money, and they were able to make it profitable for them, and they actually survived just going to competitions for 3 years. I wouldn't suggest that, but that's certainly one of the sources of income. There are now more and more government programs that you can find that look to do PPPs, private-public partnerships. And usually when I think of a private-public partnership, I think of a massive corporation building bridges or railways or infrastructure like that. But there are often funds available for R&D work, for example. So if you've got a great idea for a social entrepreneurship initiative, and you're low on R&D funds and you can't get the proof of concept, you can build the model and take it and apply for one of these PPP grants. Then you can partner with the university, get the university to do the R&D for you, and you get a lot of value out of that. So there are a few places where you can look for public grants. There are angel investors, but angel investors are hard to find. They have a lot of opportunities, and it's going to be a struggle to get people to buy in unless you already have strong relationships or you have a lot of PR. So again, as I said before, competitions are a great way to build your PR, build your relationships, stress test your model, and get a little bit of extra revenue. So that helps source resources. But certainly, if you can put something out there, it's if you can generate some sort of proof of concept model, and it's the same thing in the tech industry, right? You generate whatever your app is, you put it out, and then you try to get someone interested when they see your app, and then they'll throw some money at you. I think Mark Cuban recently offered some people who would put together a dating site $30 million just buy their site. Didn't really have much in the way of traffic yet, but he saw the potential. And but it did have some traffic, right? So once you get active, you can draw people in and make that compelling model. So it's hard to do it if you're just on paper.
So you've had experience with pitches, right? And so
Yeah.
a lot of times you're pitching, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any advice at a granular level on sort of the whole preparing for the pitch and executing on the pitch?
If I don't have to do another competition pitch in my life, that'll be good. I certainly have done enough, I think. Competition pitches are, I think I found them fun most of the time, but there's a lot of grind in getting ready for them. Once you get up on stage, it's a great time, but getting ready for it is work, and it's hard to give you granular advice on it, because the thing is that different competitions are going to have different priorities and different things to focus on, and so you really, it's the opposite of granular, but you really need to know exactly what the competition is looking for and really build and target your pitch at the competition, at the audience. If you know what the judges are, you can use what you know about the judges to help tweak your pitch. It would be rare, I think, to go to a competition and not know at least 48 hours in advance, if not well before, who the judges are going to be. And you can certainly use that to help tailor your pitch. Also, if you know what the competition is, you can use that to tailor your pitch as well. One of the things we did for our final pitch is we knew roughly what other people were pitching on, but even if we hadn't, we knew we were going to go first. And because we were going first, we strategically aligned our pitch to go first. So we knew that the general topic was food security, and so we were able to take food security and redefine the term. And so make sure that the term, as we talked about it for our whole pitch, was really addressed by the way we were looking at it, and we suspected that other people would take a different angle at it. And so, it's a competition. It's not just about making sure that you look great, but it's making sure that you look great in comparison to everybody else. So you can think strategically about how other people will be presenting their projects and position yourselves against them effectively, or separate from them, so you don't look like you're competing directly against them. It can help the judges think about you in a different way. Mm-hmm. I'll be honest though, there's a huge component that is luck. Because since doing a lot of pitches, I now have judged a lot of competitions, and the discussion in the judging room is very different from one group of judges to another. The judges' priorities are very different, and the little things can throw judges off. And so there really is a huge amount of luck. So if you build a brilliant pitch and you go up and pitch, you may very well be the best pitch in the room. And I might have given you the money, but that doesn't mean you're going to win. And I think that being able to take that in stride without it being emotionally devastating is an important trait in someone who's going to do a lot of pitches. Right. Yeah. If I can, actually, I can give you an example of someone who failed at the Hall Prize, who did not win $1 million in my year. In 2013, there were a lot of people pitching. There's this one group from South Africa called Real Gardening, had a really cool model where they did seeds and strips of paper that you could tear off, came with directions. I won't get deeply into it, but they had a neat model for distributing farming and empowering people with no farming experience to do some food generation on their own. Now, they didn't win at the Hall Prize, but they built great relationships. And in September, they closed a deal for, I think, $3 million in funding. Mm-hmm. So a year after not winning the $1 million at the Hall Prize, they got $3 million. Mm-hmm. So going to the competitions, I've said before, and I think I'll say it probably again, is one of the most valuable things you can do as a social entrepreneur. Mm-hmm. Sure, until we build a really strong network for everybody.
Mm-hmm. So my last topic question has to do with assessing. How do you measure social impact? Did you build that into your business planning and the evolution of Aspire, and how has that changed since? And can you talk a little bit about assessing?
Assessing is something that seems like a reasonable thing to think about it's a necessary thing to think about when you're looking at social entrepreneurship. It seems like it's not terribly complicated because not-for-profits have been doing assessing for a long time, right? And so it seems you just pull the tools from the not-for-profit toolbook and off you go. But it's not as simple in social entrepreneurship, and things often end up costing a lot more than you think they will. So for example, one of the species of insects we're looking at is quite high in iron, and we wanted to do an assessment with women whether or not we, if we were to provide low-cost insects, they consume more, what that would do to anemia levels in an area that had something like 70% anemia incidence in the population. And the study ended up looking like it was going to cost us somewhere in the neighborhood of 150 to 200,000 US. It's a lot of money, and so that assessment we had to push off until we could find funding, and it looks like we're getting a grant to cover the cost of that study. But you have to recognize that a lot of the time assessment could cost you a whole lot of money. Now there are other things that are easier to assess. We've got, I can think of a program that's working in putting toilets into homes, and you can just count the number of toilets that are in homes, and it's a good start on assessment. Sure, you don't know usage rates and things like that, but it's a good start. So depending on what your model is, assessment might be moderately easy or incredibly difficult. We're also looking at situations where people are involving themselves in very complex situations. So if you're looking at an education model, at what point can you really assess the impact that you've had? I mean, after a year, you might know how many people are in school, and you might be able to compare that against the traditional dropout rate. But what's your long-term impact? It's going to take long-term for you to find that out. So I think, however, that assessment is really important for the stakeholders that are outside your core groups. You're going to have government investors, you're going to have funders, you're going to have angels, just people around who are interested in your project. And even if you have something that's challenging and nuanced and difficult to assess, if you don't provide any sort of feedback for them, it's going to be hard for them to buy in. And certainly it's going to be hard to attract additional funding. So you have to identify what aspects of what you're doing have impact that's measurable at a reasonably low cost. And if you can't do that, maybe you need to shift your model a little bit. And I think that's a hard balance to strike between the financial viability of your model, between your model really doing, between your business really doing what you want it to do, and then being able to measure the impact in a way that you can communicate that effectively to the stakeholders outside your organization.
So do you find that any of the assessment is actually burdensome or an impediment to innovation? Have you noticed frustrations around the drive for assessment?
I wouldn't say. So when you're any kind of entrepreneur, your time is, you just don't have enough time at all. You have this vast list of things you want to do, and there's this tiny subset that you actually get done, and you have to prioritize and reprioritize and focus. And so taking time out to focus on assessment, that's a drain on your other opportunities, and it's going to restrict your options in some ways. And so, I mean, there are ways around that, but nothing's going to stop it from being some sort of drain on you. We can talk about ways around it. You can do things like, if you're doing a social entrepreneurship and you've built a little bit of buzz, you don't need a lot, and you have some small degree of resources, it's not challenging to get interns on board. You can get unpaid interns from a lot of places, essentially student volunteers who want some sort of work experience during the summer. You can often find university programs that actually, if they have students who are in a program that has an internship component, you can often find university programs that will subsidize the interns. So McGill does that for some of the interns from the MBA program and from the BCom program too, I believe. McGill has some scholarships to help fund them so they can go work for a not-for-profit and possibly a social enterprise. So if you do that, that gives you access to a resource there that you can use as an assessment tool. And you can often find people in that field, find students who have some theoretical experience around assessment, or at least are willing to dig through the books and figure out how to do it properly. But like anything else, even interns, I mean, they might make you more efficient, but you're still going to bleed some time bringing them on board, training them, supervising them, looking for them in the first place. So yeah, I don't think there's any way to do assessment without it burdening your business. You just have to if you do it right, you'll do it in such a way that the return on that time is valuable to you.
Okay, so I've got 2 final closing questions. We've covered 5 topics. We've covered designing, mobilizing, scaling, resourcing, and assessing. Is there anything that you feel is being missed as a conversation piece for social initiatives at startup phase or at various developmental stages? Is there anything important?
I think there's nothing that I'd flag at a high level. If we want to get a little bit more granular, there's about 10,000 things that we could talk about. But at the high level, I think that's a really good place to look at. It's a good structure to use. And I think it draws people's attentions to some of the most important factors and some things that we probably ignored at the beginning and in many ways got lucky with. And so I think having that structure will prove quite valuable to new social entrepreneurs.
Great. And Gabe, any story that you have from this journey as a social entrepreneur, whether it was competing in the Hulk Prize or since then, that's just a good story that you want to share?
Sure. I told you I'm vegetarian. I've been vegetarian for 20 years now. Do not remember what steak tastes like. And the idea of eating insects does not appeal. I mean, if you eat meat, you can think about eating insects. If it doesn't sound good to you, imagine you found meat gross and how much more unappealing you'd find insects. So I'm not really into insects. And I flew to Thailand to do some research. And I went to a farm there that grows palm weevils. And palm weevils are essentially grubs or maggots that are about the size of your thumb. And they're white and squirmy, and they don't look terribly appetizing. And they're grown in this muddy, swampy thing. And so you take them out, you wash them off. I watched them boil them, saute them in Thai basil and chilies, and I mean, you're there, you really have to eat them. And it's hard. I didn't think, I asked me when I started my MBA if I was going to be working in farming insects. That would not be on my short list. But yeah, so I had to try these. So I picked one up and with much trepidation popped it in my mouth, and it was extraordinarily good. Like, it wasn't just good, it was extraordinary. Like, this is the thing that, like, if you have a beer, I'd snack on these every night. And I really would. And it's like, and there's still, the thing is that while I was eating them the first time, I had this war in me between the utter disgust I felt, and I was disgusted, and the fact that they were delicious. It was a weird experience. But it was really good that I was willing to stretch and pop them in my mouth, because if they tell you they're delicious, you're not going to believe them. But if you try it and it's delicious, and we actually have now a business, a good chunk of our business is based around breeding palm weevils, and it probably wouldn't be if I hadn't gone back to the team and advocated strongly for these as a component of our business, because they just taste that good. And so I think that I'm assuming that most people going into social entrepreneurship won't be popping insects into their mouths, and that's fine. But I think being willing to stretch yourself and go outside of your comfort zones, whether that just means going outside your comfort zone socially and talking to people you otherwise wouldn't, or stretching yourself academically or outside your sphere of expertise. But if that stretch, that willingness to push yourself a little bit further is a critical tool for a social entrepreneur, and I think can really help drive your success.
That's a great story. And I'll just share with you that after we saw each other at the Global Social Business Summit in Mexico, I went to a little town called Tepoztlan on the weekend. It's huge open air market, and in my tacos I sprinkled some crickets, and I went for it.
And?
Yeah, it was crunchy. Thank you so much.